Auto sequence start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Today's session is going to focus on engaging your audience at their social hangouts, maximising social media, advertising, return on investment. The place to start from my perspective is always around the social media landscape. We all know social media from when I first started getting involved in paid social media activity was 2007. So that feels like a long time ago. It makes me feel actually a lot older than I am. But it was around 2007, and I think about the changes that have taken place from then to now is absolutely staggering. I also think it's worth saying that the changes that we've seen sort of over the last 6 to 12 months have also been quite substantial in this space. It is constantly evolving, it's constantly moving. But I guess, Ben, I'll come to you first to highlight some of the key changes that we have observed during pandemic and this post-pandemic world we're fingers crossed all emerging into very shortly.
As you mentioned, social's only been around for around about 14 years, which is less than half of my life. But 53.6% of the world's population now use social media, which it's ridiculous. It's almost 4 billion people on the planet are now using a social media platform of some sort. And when you have a look at things like average daily usage, the average daily usage at the moment is around 2 hours and 25 minutes. The importance of social media is only going to become more and more prevalent every single month, every single year. And certainly over the last 12 months, as we don't want to keep calling, what's happened over the last 12 months, whatever. But it's certainly helped with the growth on social media. I mean, when we have a look at the amount, I guess, of the growth within the population versus the growth of the amount of people utilizing social media, population's grown about 1% when we compare 2021 to 2020. But social engagement and social usership is up by just over 13%.
But then I think, when we generally come back to looking at social, I guess in the kind of commerce sphere as well, thinking about, how people use it for research. I think there's some stats around YouTube, about 50% of people, research stuff on YouTube. And I think often SEOs like to cite to me it is the second largest search engine. So, making sure that you've got presence there. But I think as well, we've seen a lot of newer platforms come up over the kind of last 14 months. And I think TikTok's a really interesting one, that it used to be, that one that, was 15-year-old kids, and now you're kind of nans on there doing TikTok dances. So I think you have seen kind of a lot of behaviour change. And like you say, there's absolute massive scope for kind of marketers to be getting involved with different platforms and kind of taking advantage of different formats they offer as well.
Over the last year, particularly over the last 6 months or so, we've seen a massive increase in competition. Brands are realizing that and seeing the significant growth in usership across all the channels, and more brands than ever are really entering that market from a paid perspective. What that does mean is we have seen trends, particularly this first quarter of the new financial year, where CPCs are getting slightly more expensive, purely through competition. You've got more brands with more ads, and your CPMs for your individual placements are increasing, but also you're just seeing a wider variety of people within that sphere. And it does make it a lot more important for you to be, as we'll come on to later, making sure that we're targeting the right people and making sure that we're making our social work as effectively as it can.
We've seen increased engagement, increased users, increased number of platforms being engaged with potentially some increased regulation changes from the likes of Apple through iOS 14. I guess that, which is then led, by the way, increased competition, increased number of people, has led to increased cost. So I think the question I always come back to is then, how do we go about making your brand stand out?
There's really content as a subject really is the key here. You can as we were talking about, the market itself is becoming much more saturated. And that just places more and more emphasis on the effectiveness of your individual feed placement or your individual ad placement, and how we can make that stand out. Because if you're just because of this increased volume, if your ads aren't standing out, you're going to be wasting money. And regardless of how well targeted your audience might be, or how sort of efficient your sort of conversion optimization is, etc. Like if your content isn't engaging that user, they're just going to scroll past. So it is really sort of like the underlying principle, or at least one of the sort of key pillars that we need to make sure that we're getting right, just so that we can sort of stand out in this highly competitive landscape and make sure that we're actually grabbing that user's attention and drawing them into the brand or to whatever our offering is.
What is good content?
Well, I guess I'd always say you need to start with insight, really. You really need to understand what's motivating your audience, what your audience wants. And I think there's loads of different ways you can look at this. I think search is a hugely valuable data source to help you understand more around the kind of category, the brand, what consumers are wanting to know. You know, using things like Google Trends, Also Asked, Answer the Public, which are all free tools, can really help you get an insight into, you know, if you're selling a product or in a certain category, what do people actually want to know about it? What's going to engage people? What's going to grab their attention? And I think there's a load of other really good data sources out there as well. Things like YouGov Explorer, which is a kind of free tool they have, which you can kind of put in bits of an audience and understand what their kind of attitudes are to advertising, what kind of brands they like. And all of this can kind of help you build that persona, really, to really understand, right, what is that content that's going to stand out and engage people. And then I think it's about getting into the execution of that. So thinking about, right, we understand what these topics are, what our audience want to know, and also what we want to say to them, but actually what formats are going to be most engaging. I think all of it kind of comes back to thinking about what works and what you're trying to say. So I think sometimes brands can make a common mistake of trying to put too much in content as well. And if you think about the space of social, it's a very fast moving platform. So really think about kind of grabbing attention really, really early and making sure you get that. And I think one of the things as well that we often see a bit of a mistake from brands is not having any kind of branding on there, especially, you know, if you're doing video up front. And it is, I mean, I've worked on so many brands that have had stories about being misattributed to other brands. And if you're spending a lot of money and you're basically just doing your competitor's job for them, you know, so really making sure that's clear that it's coming from you and signposting.
Social and paid social in particular does give you that incredible amount of flexibility.
Yeah.
Like there's so much it can actually deliver, you know, whether it be top of funnel, bottom of funnel, whether it be loyalty based programs, etc. It's got a massive amount of flexibility. So I guess, you know, one of the things I just wanted to come in on Ben, if you can jump in on this would be good, was around sort of the targeting capabilities and the channel choices that we make dependent on, you know, once you've got your content, it's great, but then it's about understanding where that content fits.
Yeah, definitely. And the real key thing here is understanding your audience. If you don't understand your audience, you're going to be on the wrong platform at the wrong time. And it's going to potentially be wasted money. And that's not to say that you can't test. We have to test. We have to try different things on different platforms. Content is the probably single most important thing you will ever do within social media. If your content's terrible, then your audience isn't going to react. You're not going to be sticky. You're not going to have, you know, the advocacy of brand loyalty and all that kind of stuff. So having edgy, you know, grabby kind of content is going to be really, really important.
When I think about social, I think, James, when we're talking about how we use it with our clients, I think that's absolutely key for me, is around, you know, ensuring that we've got the right message, hitting the person at the right stage. And I think, you know, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, all of the major social platforms definitely allow you to do that and allow you to sequence those ads. And, you know, that's where it's sort of the key sweet spot, if you like, where sort of content and targeting both mix and give you the capability that is sort of social paid advertising to really resonate with an audience in a particular moment. The other thing I'd come in and say is just the amount of sort of social searching that takes place now. You know, the amount of discovery that takes place is incredible. We've seen that, you know, definitely grow, I think, over the last 18 months with the pandemic. We've seen audiences on social researching products in a way that they weren't before. Yeah. You know, it used to be very much the preserve of search. You know, people wouldn't know what they were doing or didn't know what they wanted to buy. So would go into Google and type in, you know, best gazebos or best garden furniture and you know, they'd then have a look around based on that. I think the way that the social platforms have developed now, there's definitely a lot more social-based research activity taking place within social, where people are looking for inspiration. One of the terms that we often use with social media is audience and your audience. And I think that one of the things that we talk about from a social perspective is often prospecting, which is very much focused on new audience, but also sort of remarketing, retargeting, and engaging with your existing audience. So, James, I just had first I'll come to you on this, was sort of how do you best resonate with your audience from a paid social perspective?
So you can use a channel element to sort of like trying to develop that engagement with your audience, but you also need to understand, I suppose the first thing is probably understand who is your audience, where do they sit, like look at your existing organic engagement, like those sorts of elements give you a lot of guidance on sort of the sort of things that people will that your existing customers, your existing page engagers, etc., are all looking at. And there are tools that you could use to sort of like look at those affinity segments and look at like sort of what types of content that they're reacting to. And once you understand that, you're able to sort of promote or like develop ads that really sort of engage those people and hit them at the right sort of stage. The targeting does lend itself to really sophisticated audiences, particularly the lookalikes that you mentioned. If you're talking about audience like platforms with more than like 4, or like social media as a whole with like almost 4 billion users, a lookalike list in that pool with that many different data touch points can become very sophisticated. And using all the data that you've got available really allows you to have this sort of the best or the most advantage, or like the biggest advantage in that market. You know who your audiences are. You've got historic data on what works well. You probably can segment those audience lists into sort of brackets of engagement and purchase quality and value, etc. And you can start to like separate all of these out, create different lookalikes, create different types of content for those things, and really make sure that you're tailoring your entire social strategy to sort of resonate, to have ads that resonate with your audience and really generate that engagement or that introduction to brand or whatever the objective is.
Yes, I think for me, kind of the biggest things are probably, I'd say the first off, kind of social, I think probably changed advertising a lot because it's the first channel where your audience have been able to shout back at you. So I think being really authentic is super key. And, because, I think we're seeing more and more audiences will call you out. So it has to be very authentic and feels right for the brand. I think, tone is also really important. I think it's about, if you're thinking about how you take your brand into social, and it probably isn't the same as the kind of other comms you're doing, it might have, a bit of a stretch to that tone. And I guess timing, I think we talked a lot about, different channels for different uses. And I guess really medium is the message, isn't it? So thinking about, right, if it's LinkedIn, is it people in more of a business mindset? Is it, TikTok, which is a bit more kind of fast, high turnover? Or is it something like YouTube where people might be consuming more longer form content? So I think those probably are the biggest 3 areas for me in terms of social advertising.
Just head into now what we always finish on, which is around 5 key takeaways. And I've been noting these down as I go through the session. But I think the first one would be for me is understand the social media landscape, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, it's growing, showing no signs of really slowing down. Every time we hear that it is slowing down or a particular platform's not performing as well, it feels like something else comes in and takes its place and pushes it on to the next level. If I had £1 for every time that I heard, Facebook's dead, I'd be a very wealthy person. But yet we still seem to have lots of people on Facebook, lots of people engaging in Facebook, lots of ad spend going through Facebook. So I think for me, have an understanding of the landscape and what each platform offers. I guess that ties into the second point, which is, cost per clicks and CPCs are increasing generally on the platforms. Reason behind that is increased competition. Right, there's more people trying to bid for the same number of eyeballs, if you like, or a disproportionately growing number of eyeballs in comparison to the people that are in there. So I think from my perspective, you've got to be select. You've got to understand what you're trying to push, why you're trying to push it, and ultimately understand that audience and the different types of people involved. I think then that leads you on nicely onto content. So, we've talked about it previously. Becca sort of gave some great stats around that, but absolutely content is king. The fourth point then is flexibility. Flexibility, and the flexibility offered within the platforms is both a gift and a curse. It's a gift for us as marketers because there's such, choice in there now. We can go after and do so many different things. It's also a curse because I think that one of the challenges that people often feel is they try and do everything for everyone. And the reality is, that's when, for me, social media really falls over itself, is where you're trying to make sure that your paid social activity is delivering the same outcome for all of your audience as a collective. The reality is you have to segment down and you have to put something that resonates in front of the right audience. And then finally, I think, Becca, your point was key for me around authenticity, timing and tone, the key, probably more key than they've ever been. So do have a well-structured plan. The thing I just wanted to finish the session really with was just saying, if anybody wants to follow up with us, if anybody wants a free paid social audit, then we're happy to provide that. If you're going to do that, then email into info@mediaworks.co.uk, and we can obviously sort of, have one of members of my team, James's team, look into that for you and look at how effective your paid social activity is currently being and areas of suggestions for improvement. Thank you very much for engaging with us. Hope you've taken a lot from this session and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers.
Start